Hey, what's up, guys? So this is going to be kind of fun. We've got a special guest with us today. Here on the phone with me right now, I'm actually talking to Mike Valentine. So, hey, how's it going, Mike?
Doing very well, thanks. And how are you?
Doing great, doing great. Thanks so much for agreeing to sit down with me here and talk about your new V1 Gen2.
Pleased to do it.
Yeah, it's actually perfect timing. I've been running it here for the past maybe week or so, and I've been really impressed with it so far. I was actually just about to sit down and kind of share my impressions and do a video about that, but I figure maybe talking about the detector with you, we can go over all the new changes. You can tell us about the improvements over the original V1, and I'd love to just kind of pick your brain and learn a little bit more about the detector.
Sure, let's do it.
Yeah, so maybe starting off, can you just kind of give us an overview as far as the new Gen 2? Like, what are the biggest changes and improvements that you've put in here to the new detector?
Okay, well, let me start by saying that we've been listening to customers for a very long time, and every time we get ready to make a change, something else comes up, and it's kept us real busy, and so this is an accumulation of everything that people have, let's say, convinced us would be an improvement. It's not everything that everybody ever wanted, but it's everything that we could be convinced was desirable.
Right.
And we've tried to put that into this new unit kind of all at once, which is a little scary from an engineering development standpoint because it's not an evolution. Apart from, the information display is very evolution.
Yeah.
But the rest of it is, like on the circuits inside, it's almost unrecognizable about what's going on in there.
Yeah, so internally, it's a completely different platform under the hood, correct?
It is.
So maybe tell me a little bit more about kind of the platform, and I know you've got the new SAW DDL filter, and so tell me a little bit more about what's kind of internally different here with the new detector.
Okay, well, there are two things going on that contribute to the paradox of longer range and less lane change radar interruptions.
Mm-hmm.
You can always cut back on lane change radars by making it sort of deaf.
Yeah.
And that's one way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can go for super far out maximum range and then be plagued by lane change radars at ever increasing distances, which doesn't sound like a lot of fun either.
Exactly. So it's a balance.
So there's kind of two things working against each other with sensitivity and filtering. They have a tendency to fight each other. Mm-hmm. So one of the things we did was to put low noise amplifier technology on K and KA band. And, we've been looking at that for a long time, and it was very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it's still very expensive, but we thought we'd go ahead and do it.
Yeah, and you put a high-quality LNA in there, too.
That,
So.
that acts kind of like a magnifying glass to find ever weaker signals.
Mm-hmm.
And it's... I don't think we can quite see sun noise with it, but it's pretty low noise.
Mm-hmm.
If you were in the satellite TV business, seeing sun noise is kind of a big deal. How many dB of sun noise can you get when you point the dish at the sun kind of stuff? So
I never thought about that.
it's the same kind of technology you'd see for weak space kind of stuff. I mean, we're trying to do the best we can as far as looking down into the noise. And then what the SAW dispersed delay line does is enables us to really speed up how fast we're looking at the entire spectrum, and that gives us a leg up on trying to sort out signals that are flickering around all over the place.
Right.
The K-band environment for signals these days is very disappointing from a purity standpoint.
No kidding.
There's, the trash volume from lane change and crash prevention radars that are out there, particularly on trucks. It's unbelievable, the crash prevention radars in trucks. And there are, a handful, like more than one or two, different flavors of lane change radar signal modulation and that kind of stuff that all have to be dealt with. And what we found with the original V1, it had a very sensitive, hard to improve on signal verifying method. But unfortunately, take out some of the harder to get rid of stuff like Acuras and other things people are very familiar with.
Right, yeah, your Honda and Acura falses.
So the SAW D2L is gives us very fine resolution at very high repetition rates, which allows us to watch how these things flicker back and forth, and that way we can isolate them from a more traditional police radar signal. And it makes it possible to isolate them. Now, it's not easy, but it does make it possible to isolate them through their signatures. So we're able to see more detail in the signatures with this and do it much more quickly.
Yeah, and what we've been seeing so far, like my own experience, I mean, the blind spot filtering in the new V1 is the best I've seen out of any radar detector on the market. Like, period. It's impressive. Like, I mean, you're able to. It's.
That's because we got thousands of development miles with a finished product evaluating different software approaches. So
yeah.
It's a lot of work, but hey, looks like it's paying off.
It's refreshing. I mean, you're filtering out almost all the Mazdas, Hondas, and Acuras. I'm still seeing some GMs, and I had a Chrysler Pacifica false the other day.
There are a few we can't quite do yet, but that's...
Yeah, but even those, they're weak signals.
Software science fair projects that are in progress or to be commenced shortly, and we hope to keep improving on that.
Yeah. And I saw on the website, speaking of updates, like the new V1, there's going to be software updates that we can now update our detectors over the phone in the app. Is that correct?
Yeah. Likely the way that'll work, there'll be a separate upgrade app. There won't be the V1 connection app, but it'll be another upgrade app that you'll be able to download from the app for Play stores, and that's how we'll distribute the new improvements or bug fixes or whatever they turn into.
Sure, and I'm assuming there'll be like free downloadable software updates, and then for hardware updates, we would still send that in like before, correct?
Well, I'm hoping not to have too many hardware updates. But, I mean, like, who knows?
Yeah.
But this hardware platform should last a while, in my view. Now, who knows? You know, all plans are subject to change on the first contact with the enemy. You know.
Of course, yeah.
But that's the plan as it is now. I'm not going to say it's baked in stone. We won't change this platform, but it shouldn't. I mean, I really set out to make something that was durable from the hardware end of things, so that software could be the main way to improve it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess maybe speaking of hardware, I know there was some testing done this past weekend, and I'm going to be doing some testing as well, but the range on this detector seems to be a big step up from the original V1. It's now like neck and neck with some of the best performing detectors on the market, which is a huge improvement.
Yeah. Well, it's... I was actually astounded at how well it works on KA band.
Yeah.
We have our local town here, Blue Ash, Ohio, seems like everybody's got a Stalker Dual mounted on their police car. And sometimes they run them both at the same time. Sometimes they just run front or rear, but they're typically like police beacons here. They're not doing too much instant on. They're just driving around with them turned on.
That's so nice. Constant on 24/7.
I thought the thing was falsing on KA a number of times. So I got my phone out. It's like, oh no, that's a Stalker.
Yeah.
And then I drive around, and it's like, oh, there they are. You know, like over the river and through the woods kind of stuff, far away. And I wasn't used to that, so I was sure people were going to be happy with the KA band range benefits of this new platform.
Yeah. Speaking of, I guess, KA, I noticed you removed KA guard for the new V1. So how does the filtering and the false alert stuff work now with the new Gen 2?
Ask me a tighter question.
Okay, so is there still filtering being done, or is it implemented differently on KA, or how do you filter out any false alerts on KA?
The filtering is, of course, completely different. If you go back to our original early 90s patents on high sensitivity detection, it was sort of hunt and peck, and it would scoot along, and if it's suspected a signal was there, it would stop and then verify. And then we over the years stacked up a whole bunch of things on Verify to try and get rid of crap signals. And that was kind of the extent of it. Now this, because it's, you're getting the full detail report every few milliseconds. It just requires a different way of thinking about how to pick it out. Because what the SAW DDL device does is essentially it's an analog signal processor when swept through the band, and it performs a fast Fourier transform on the fly and requires no power budget to do it, which is one of the reasons I like this solution compared to doing it all in an FPGA or something. We have an FPGA to post process what comes out of there because it's truly drinking from the fire hose. You have to be very fast to keep up with what's going on. But because it's constantly sweeping, it doesn't park, it doesn't analyze by sitting on the signal for some period of time. It just requires different algorithms, different way of thinking about it, and so that's been an interesting part of the development.
Have you found it to be pretty effective then with this new sweeping algorithm to filter out Cobra falses or satellite dishes or cell phone towers or things like that?
Well, some of these things are kind of tertiary, and if we don't run across them hardly ever, then they're hard to analyze from a lab standpoint as to what we need to do. Now, we pretty much got rid of all sweeping detector crap.
Okay.
The part that sometimes can show up is on their retrace pedestal, where they park for a few milliseconds or maybe 10 or 20 to make sure they're all the way back at the end of their sweep before they launch another one. And that can kind of build up, but we have, as our patents would show, ways to go about getting rid of that by analyzing subharmonics to see what's going on. And so if we have something that's messing around at 36, we can go look at 24 even and see if there's something there at the same time. And if there is, we go, we can kick 36 out because it's clearly harmonically related. So to the extent we're successful at that, you have to be able to find the 24. And if the 24 is not as strong as the 36, well, sometimes you might get a little blip or something before it finds it. And however, it should, once it figures it out, junk it out. So
makes sense. So I guess speaking of these,
sometimes it works, sometimes it's right at the edge. So that's another thing I want to talk about.
Yeah,
is how to figure out what you got when the signals are all weak. It's actually a lot easier to figure out if a signal is like a lane change radar or a cop when the signals are strong, because you got lots of signal to noise. Everything's all pretty evident what's happening. But if you're only a few dB out of the noise, everything looks alike. And it's a real challenge to not carve off all kinds of K-band sensitivity to be able to have enough signal-to-noise ratio to tell the difference. Now, we have to have a little because you just need it. So we have monster range natively on K-band that we've used up a little bit at the edge to try and make sure we know what's going on with whether it's a blind spot or a cop.
Right.
And that's a real challenge, and it's not a challenge just for us. It's a challenge for everybody. And it's fairly interesting, because you can take these things out so they we have great performance on the bench. You put one of these. What we do is we back it up to the outside of our engineering offices. So because that's the back of the car is where it comes out, and then test it with instruments and/or live V1s with wires poking out of them or whatever. Right through the window at 15-foot range. And you can sit there and tune away and make algorithms and just completely get rid of it, and then go out on the road and go, damn, what was I thinking? So
Makes sense. So I guess speaking of like the new way that you're sweeping and you're filtering out the false alerts, I know you mentioned it's really, really fast now. Like, what's the sweep times? I know the patents were like 2 milliseconds or something to sweep all of XK, KU, and KA.
Yeah, well, if you do that for the front and the back, it comes out to about 4 milliseconds.
4 milliseconds.
You got one complete sweep front and one complete sweep back.
And that's crazy fast. Like, that's crazy fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no issues
so it's
with
like,
quick trigger.
250 times a second, whereas you'd be lucky to get 15 times a second out of other older ways of doing it.
That's true. Yeah.
That's what was. Okay, so I'll just back up and say, well, when did you figure out this was something cool to do? Well, I hate to admit it, but about 20 years ago. And at the time, we got in touch with essentially military component contractors. So they were the only ones that ever did this dispersity delay line stuff in surface acoustic wave filters.
Mm-hmm.
And talked to them about, well, if we could do this or we could do that. And then they said, well, that thing will be the size of a brick. Well, no, we can't do that. Plus, they were talking several $100s per filter, which is like, nice to know you, thanks. And
yeah.
then we started chasing it around. Well, now, if you could make, hundreds of thousands or 1 million of these things, what then would that do to your pricing? Oh, well, then we'd have to use an offshore wafer fab and start going into the whole things you have to do. And they finally said, we can't meet your price goals because, well, we just can't do it. So we started casting around, and maybe 15 years ago found a place that was into high-tech commercial stuff that could do it because, SAW filters keep getting more exotic, easier to make from a tools standpoint as time moves on. So we found a supplier that made us some prototypes. They worked great. And then when we went to apply, we thought, oh, we can't do this the old-fashioned sweep with a capacitor resistor thing. This needs to be really linear sweep. And then we started getting off into direct digital synthesizer stuff. And it's like, oh, man. Then, of course, things would happen on the regular side of the V1 business that would interrupt us. And then we'd get, kind of put this whole SAW DDL thing off to the side, and then we keep coming back to it.
Uh-huh.
So we got up the supplier, and so we got closer here a few years back, and said, okay, time for some production quotes and all that stuff. And the rep calls us and says, well, didn't you know they quit doing that? I said, what? Somebody bought our supplier for their space qualified business and didn't want to do the commercial stuff anymore. So they just gave it up. So there we were, dead in the water, and had to go find another supplier. Well, thank the Lord, we found 3. So, we got all 3 of them qualified now, and we're of course taking product, and not equally from all of them, but we're up and running. So that was a long time coming.
Okay, so yeah, it's been a while to get this new filter built in, to get it sourced, to get it cost effective and everything.
And things are changing out there the whole time, and that's one of our problems in trying to get this Generation 2 out the door. Is the Generation 1 kept us real busy with parts that go obsolete. The detector industry has to poach parts from other higher volume industries in order to be able to afford the components.
Right, yeah.
So we had some things we've been using on the insides of Generation 1 V1 that we've been using for a long time. And I guess they were being made for amps, cell phone base stations or something. Okay. And those went out of style. And then maybe you could also use them as CDMA base stations, maybe. And then when they all went digital because of LTE, nobody was buying that part anymore but us.
Mm-hmm.
And so the factory says, well, we can't justify getting it just for you, so we'll give you a last time buy opportunity. And we bought like a year's worth, and then that was it. So we had to go re-engineer the whole back end of the radio on the inside, and that takes time. And engineering resources away from getting Generation 2 out. So it's been a long slog, but we're real happy with how it's come together.
Yeah. Well, I guess speaking of which, I know there's been a rumor online, like with the new Gen 2 V1, there's no longer a knob on the front. And one of the rumors is that part of that has just been part availability for the knob. Is there any truth to that, or what's kind of the thought process for switching? Yeah.
There are a lot of amusing things out there. I mean, it's a reasonable supposition, and if you want to speculate, why not? Now, one of the reasons that the shaft and knob and all that stuff is gone is because it takes up a lot of room on the inside that we needed for circuits.
Okay.
And we went to this sort of laminar switch thing to make room, and also, frankly, you wouldn't believe how many people had no clue what that lever did.
Really? That's kind of an important lever.
We had people that had been using them for 20 years and never knew what it did. And so we thought, well, as a user interface thing, let's try and make something really simple. It's not, that doesn't require any figuring out, really.
Okay.
So we thought plus and minus for volume was pretty easy, and then power and mute with just a switch is pretty easy.
Mm-hmm.
And, okay, so it's a little convoluted to set the muted volume. And if you like to tinker with that a lot, you might look into an app to set it quickly for you. But, Apple does things where if it's too adjustable and people get weirded out by it, they just hide the adjustment. And they put it into a place that satisfies 95% of everybody and doesn't need to be adjusted. So that was sort of the direction in which we were headed with muted volume.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you push it, for sure, it mutes the volume. You can hear it not because you played with the ring slider, the lever. If you play with that and turn that up to say 3 o'clock, then you get complaints, well, the thing won't mute. It won't mute. Does it change? Yeah, the switch is broken. Are you sure? Well, see if you can change modes. Yeah, it changes modes. Well, the switch is not broken. You go this 15-minute diatribe with people. So, what we're trying to do is make the user experience for everybody very nice.
Okay.
And a few people are going to get a little frustrated, and I feel for them, but we're trying to make the most number of people the happiest they can be.
That's reasonable. That makes sense. Yeah, I guess it was kind of surprising. I just always felt like it was such a classic thing with the V1, like having the arrows, that it was kind of surprising to see it changed, but it's good to hear kind of the thought process and the benefits of why the change was made.
Yeah, the other thing is, for the outlying users that have gloves on when they drive, they couldn't turn the knob.
Okay.
But you can push a button with gloves on, and we actually spaced the plus minus buttons on top by wearing gloves and making sure somebody that was wearing gloves could do it.
Oh, I didn't think about that. I did notice that the buttons are raised, which I like, so I can just go back there and feel them by touch alone when I've got my eyes on the road.
That's
so
right.
I like that.
That's the other thing about it is that they don't have to look at it to work it.
Yeah, that's nice. I really like that.
Because a lot of times when people want to adjust the volume, they're busy doing something else, So
Yep.
you can, one hand on the steering wheel, one hand to feel their way to the buttons. That's less distracting.
That makes sense. So something else that I thought was kind of interesting is a change from the Gen 1. So the custom sweeps, or now custom frequencies, they're different here on the Gen 2 and they no longer affect performance, correct?
That's right, because custom sweeps were a way to, how to put this, reorient the attention of the detector. Because it was slow enough, it couldn't get around so fast, so if you limit the places it could look there more often, and that changed the statistics of being able to find flickery signals. You could look more often in the same place.
Yeah, it's kind of a hack for slower detectors.
Yeah, so this thing, on the other hand, there's 250 times a second, you need to go more often.
Yeah.
So what custom frequencies do, it allows people to segment it, but that's mainly to avoid something that they don't like. And it's flexible. If you travel about here, we live in Cincinnati, and we don't have every possible
almost do. You
So
got
we
a
wanted
lot.
to put the flexibility in there for somebody that was bound, determined to, if they have some jump signal, I don't know, let's just pick a number like 34.1 or something that they're real convinced isn't possibly a radar.
Sure.
And they want to avoid that. Well, then you can go in and on custom frequencies and do that. But what it adjusts is the frequencies that it will report to the user.
Got it. It's purely
Doesn't change
reporting.
anything about sensitivity or the sweep patterns or any of that stuff.
Got it.
Because it sweeps so fast that by the time it spends a lot of time just changing bands, because you got to have voltage switching between like the LNAs on K and KA versus the LNAs on X and KU. The circuits have to settle. You have to start tuning, and then you start the sweep, and so it takes so much time, and it also uses up communications bus bandwidth on the inside that screw around a lot with starting and stopping the sweep. Because you got to reload the synthesizer every time you start someplace new, and it's like, So to try to be unstressful to the circuits, we elected to just not report certain things that were dialed out of custom frequencies.
Interesting. I never
That's how
thought
that
about
is. You
that.
can think of it as a detection mask almost.
Okay, so it just like turns off alerting, not detection, but alerting to certain frequency ranges.
Right.
So maybe then with the Gen 1 V1, I know there's been a ton of experimentation with custom sweeps and how wide to go with the sweeps or what to cut out or if you should repeat the sweeps. Can you tell me like what's the optimal configuration, or is there truth to all these different fancy sweeps, or what's your take on all that?
Okay, well, first of all, super narrow sweeps. It's like playing Russian roulette with out-of-tune radar guns.
That's always the risk, yeah.
Yeah, so, it's just, if you like playing Russian roulette and you think it works for you, fine. It's all a matter of your personal confidence. It's just like driving. Do I want to take this corner at 30, or would 38 be more exciting? It's just whatever you want to do. And it does have some benefit, because if you go back to places more often, it will increase your chances of finding it. If you go twice as often, you might get as much as a dB or so extra sensitivity on the statistical side of things. It won't affect the raw radio sensitivity.
Makes sense.
But since signals flicker and that kind of stuff, you can expect a little increase.
If I was to say, like, I really want to detect 35.5 and I build in like 3 or 4 sweeps on 35.5, would that actually improve the performance over having just one 35.5 sweep?
Probably.
Okay.
Not a lot, but some.
Okay.
That's on a Gen 1.
Right, on a Gen 1, of course, not a Gen 2.
Gen 2, you won't even want to, because it'll be over the river and through the woods.
Right.
And plus, it wouldn't affect a thing on Gen 2 to change any of the frequencies.
So speaking of which, tell me about maybe the built-in 33.8 pop sweeps, and like, can we disable 33.8 under the hood, or like, how does that work with 33.8?
I'd have to go drill through the stuff to find out. That's one question I'm not prepared to answer. I don't think anything much is going on. Now, you're talking about like Euro mode and stuff like that?
Yeah, like I know with the Gen 1s, we could never disable 33.8.
What we tried to do here was make custom frequencies available also on what I'll call USA mode. That's not the name of it. But
right, yeah. It's in USA mode too.
Default mode.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to worry about any of that behaviors that went on. And I actually had to go ask engineering what's going on with that, because I didn't pay any attention to it.
Sure, yeah.
Because once we made the decision to put custom frequencies on the default setup, well, I was done thinking about the use case at that point.
Sure, yeah. I guess always test it to see if we can disable 33.8, but I guess it doesn't really. I guess it's mostly for people who have Cobra falses or
I
something.
think custom frequencies will fix that for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't tested it yet myself, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What about then maybe the like low-powered radar detection? So your MultaRadar, your Gatso, your Redflex. What's the story with the new Gen 2s?
All right, that's yet to be explored. We don't have any around here.
Right, yeah.
So, and we don't have outside beta testers, just because well, people can sign NDAs and then weird things happen.
Yeah,
so,
not everybody. Yeah, I've seen that before.
I mean, I don't have any evidence that people that have signed NDAs that we've actually had for this product, which is typically, software related or supplier related of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
None of that's happened, but I've got enough experience with, let's just say, the old days that I don't like very much in the way of non-employee beta testing.
I can understand that. That does sometimes happen, unfortunately. Leaks, whether they're intentional or inadvertent, they happen, and it sucks. But yeah, I get that.
Yeah, and I don't want to be a private detective agency to figure out who I should sign an NDA with and not.
Sure.
If you don't sign any, it kind of solves that problem.
So I guess maybe the next topic I was curious about is the logic modes. So if we go...
Wait, let's finish up on MRCD, etc.
Oh, sorry, yeah, you're right. You're right.
Those are what I would call narrowband FMCD.
Okay.
FMCW, I'm sorry, FMCW.
FMCW, yeah.
Based on the publicly available, whatever the FCC equivalent of Canada is, you can go find their bandwidth measurements and all that kind of stuff. So I know it's narrow band compared to these wide band lane change radars. So there are different flavors of FMCW, but since we don't have any around here to go try, it'll be longer before we can get out in the field and then go take some data and try some things and see what happens. It's my fondest wish that we get there. When that happens, I don't know, because we got lots of stuff going on here at the same time. So
sure,
it's not a never, but it's not a by June 3rd of it's not one of those things either. So it'll just have to come along as a surprise if it happens, and I'm sure it'll happen at some point.
Okay, so basically there's not really been any testing yet. I haven't seen any testing myself on the forums, and it's not intended to be into the detector, but if it can at some point, great.
Yeah, I mean, it's not baked in now,
right?
Because this is our first pass at doing a good job on lane change radars.
And yeah, you got that.
Cutting off any of the traditional K-bands. I mean, it's the fight. Shut it up or make it 5 miles away. Now, which one do you want? You want it for lane change or cop? Which way are you going to do that? So
yeah,
we have a continuous improvement program going on here all the time, and we're never completely happy. And I had to force this thing out the door because we're still not completely happy because software projects are like that, right?
Of course, yeah.
So anyway, this is far from a beta unit. I mean, it's been baited to death, so I don't want to leave that impression.
Right, yeah.
But we're not done improving it, so that's where we are there.
Yeah, and so the updates, I know, so the new detector, it's $499, and then what's the kind of update trade-in value, and how does that work if people want to upgrade to the new V1?
If you have an old V1 of any flavor, you can send it in, and for the time being, it's a $110 discount for us to take possession of your old one and then give you the new one. So it ends up being $389 to get that done.
Okay.
And there's if you have a very recent, still in warranty, older generation V1, there's an extra $50 sweetener if it's still in warranty. So that turns it into $339, I guess. And that's we promised upgrades. We got upgrades. We never promised how much they'd cost because you're getting a whole new thing. There's not a single part inside the detector we could possibly reuse.
Not a single one, so you're just swapping out detectors.
You get a brand new V1 Gen2. It comes in the same box. It's a new unit.
Yeah, it's brand new, inside and out.
Yeah. So with like our other upgrades, well, we could have firmware upgrades for some of them. And those were under $100. And then we've had the $289 before when it was a swap upgrade, and now that this thing has a much larger bill of materials, they're $389 for a swap upgrade.
Makes sense. So as far as using the detectors, I've been using custom sweeps forever, and I haven't really used, I guess, the logic modes as much. And so can you tell me a little bit more so I know, like, advanced logic mode? Like, what is it actually looking for?
So in all bogies, it just reports everything it's fine.
All bogies, yep.
That it wants to report, meaning like not lane change radars if it can help it.
Mm-hmm.
The analyzer modes, logic and advanced logic, have essentially what we used to do for a long time on X-band, where it's a combination of things in the algorithm. It looks to see if it's a single signal or not, or whether it's got a buddy.
Okay.
If it's got a buddy, it's like, well, that might be some store doors.
Mm-hmm.
So let's hang back until it gets a little stronger and see what's going on there. However, if it's a singleton and it's been around for some period of time, it's like, okay, this might be real. Let's get going here.
Mm-hmm.
So we do the same thing on K-band, and it also has a tendency. If you select one of these modes, it'll wrap up signals that you've passed by a little more quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So that once it goes down below, I forget what the threshold is in DVD, but once it gets down below an important signal, it'll just wrap it up and mute it.
Mm-hmm.
So you get pre-muted before it knows really what's going on. Once it figures it out, it might or might not unmute until you get to a certain level, and then it's always got safety burn through.
Right.
Always. So you get to a certain point, and it's like, well, I don't care if it is a store door. It could be a cop, and then we get on from there. And we've adjusted those things over 20 years, and we think we got a good balance. And people can argue with us whether it's so many dB one way or another, and it's like, really? So this is this is trying to satisfy 95% of our customers the best way we know how. So then in advanced logic, anything that was muted, this doesn't show up on the screen at all, doesn't make any noise. So what I always advise is that the little L logic mode is really a kind of a familiarization or a what's this thing doing now kind of way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you get comfortable with it, it's telling you what you need to know when you need to know it, then you can just switch up into large L, and everybody's happy. Now we ship it in large L for the same reason that the people who didn't know what the lever on behind the volume knob was for, because we had people that would complain that it was chatty on X-band, and they never changed modes. They thought A was for automatic because they never read the manual. So
sure.
So what we're trying to do here is bias the setup to something that I'm completely comfortable driving around with my own.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm out testing new software, I'll drive it in little L just to see what's going on.
Right.
But I much prefer it in big L, and I trust it in big L. And I'm the target market.
Mm-hmm. So,
and maybe that's one of the reasons this thing is the way it is because I'm a member of the target market, and I have my own ideas about what I will strive for and what I don't want and all of that stuff.
mm-hmm.
So this is kind of almost 30 years of Detector. Well, it's more than that.
Mm-hmm.
It starts in 1976 for a Detector DNA.
Right.
And yeah.
So what would you say then, like at this point with the current version of advanced logic, what are the kind of high level, like what are the main benefits and what are maybe some of the risks?
Okay, the risks are that you're driving through a small town that has a corner and a hill right at the end of it.
Okay.
And it might decide to shorten the amount of time that you get for this very weak signal as you're reaching the city limits or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not. It all depends on the circumstance. I'd say the risks are fairly low, but they exist. And particularly if you're somebody who likes to find something 5 miles away before you get there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's only a mile or two this way, or a mile.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then it's like, how much are you irritated by store doors? And my sweet spot is. So I guess that's where it's set.
So it's, I guess, a little bit more of an aggressive filter to try to filter out some of the store openers, but it could potentially affect range in some of the trickier situations?
Well, it's just exactly like what used to happen on X-Band. It's no different. We use the same algorithm.
Okay.
So anybody that's ever had the V1 that had X-Band store doors and X-Band radars around will be completely familiar with how this works.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't changed anything from those days.
Okay. Yeah, I always...
that we know about. I mean,
Yeah, I disable X-Band since we don't have it here.
It's so complicated in software. It's amazing we know what goes on. Or at least it's amazing that I know what goes on. Our engineers are good.
Yeah.
But it's for me to figure out what's going on in there sometimes. It's like, whoa, gosh. So I'm really glad I got great engineers working for me.
Totally. Yeah, and so I guess, what about maybe the RDD immunity against a Spectre? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, unless you have LNAs on all bands, you got a leak path for the local oscillator to get out into the wild. Not only the local oscillator, but its harmonics. Because the Spectres, the very first Spectres used escort clone gun diode mixer antenna assemblies. Mm-hmm. In the day, escorts had the same mixer horn everything for K and X band using the fundamental and the second harmonic, and they were tuned up to work great on second harmonic. So if you have like an 11.7 gigahertz local oscillator that the Spectre's looking for, then it can also probably hear the 23.4 coming out at the same time. Mm-hmm. And it may not, and so if you just block 11.7 and you don't block 23.4, well then it can hear you on 23.4.
Makes sense.
So you got to get both of them. Mm-hmm. And so we have low noise amplifiers that act kind of like one-way valves.
Right.
Well, kind of like.
Yeah.
Maybe leaky one-way valves. They don't leak very much. Mm-hmm. And we have those between the local oscillator injected into the mixers and the outside world. Mm-hmm. That's basically responsible for why. Now, because we were going to use low noise amplifiers anyway, we just made sure we did a good job of keeping signals from leaking around to the front of them in terms of the layout on the circuit boards and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And just paid attention to details, but we didn't set out to make a self detector as the priority. We just kind of figured it was going to happen anyway. Right. And because it was going to happen anyway, we paid a little attention to trying to keep inside the case coupling from getting around to the front of them. And I think, as you can see, did a pretty good job.
Yeah, it did great against my Spectre 3. I think I get maybe like 2 feet of detection range, which is ridiculous. Like, it's stealth in practice. It's great.
Yeah, so our advertising claim on that is it keeps the signals within the perimeter of your own vehicle.
That's a fair way.
I think, at 2 feet, that's a reasonable way to.
That's a reasonable thing. And if we're talking 2 feet, that's more of like an academic distance. Who cares 2 feet? Because what matters in practice is they're not going to be able to detect it. So there you go.
Yeah. So.
Speaking of.
Yeah. And the other thing is, some of the signals that they're looking for are kind of weak in our circuitry and layout. So we have, like on X-band and KU, we have what amounts to a balanced mixer, which doesn't conduct out very much local oscillator energy anyway. And then you put an LNA in front of it, and it's like, that's stops it up pretty good.
Yeah. So that actually reminds me, I know you've got the patent for like the new dual plane horn, and you've got the 2 microstrips coming out of the horn. Can you tell me a little bit about the design of the new horns?
Other than the fact that it took us about many dozens of months on a finite element type microwave simulation program. I come on a computer with lots of cooling on it. Mm-hmm.
Just to simulate and design all that.
There's a lot of finite element analysis with the antenna and the lens and the rest of that stuff. Yeah, everything in here has been like rubbed on pretty hard for a very long time.
Makes sense.
And the only place probably left to make any substantial improvements is, as I said before, little science fair projects in future software.
What are some of the main benefits you found with the new horn that you're using compared to the V1 Gen1 horn?
Well, one of the things is it's, I suppose it's, well, it would be obvious kind of to radar detector engineers, but it puts the low noise amplifiers much closer to the antenna feed point than if you had a diplexer in front of it and all the losses. So it probably saves us, I don't know, I'm going to guess like a dB or more of performance of the low noise amplifiers and stuff. So they don't have losses in front of them. They're just right there into the antenna structure. Mm-hmm. That was one of the main benefits. The other benefit is that you don't have lots of jump throughs on the circuit boards, which means your low noise amplifiers can maintain their gain, and you don't have spurious paths by which interferences and or local oscillator leakage or stuff like that. Anytime you put a plated through hole through a circuit board at microwave frequencies, you end up making little teeny antenna posts in the board.
Right.
And so if you have all the X and KU and its antenna stuff on one side of the multi-layer board, and then you take the K and KA stuff and have it all on another side, then you can make it all together in microstrips, so it's all one continuous thing and doesn't get confused by jumping around through the boards so much. We got so much circuits, they have to be on both sides of the circuit board.
Right, so we got
LNAs, we got front and rear. I mean, like if you look at some of the, let's call them single forward-facing antenna, lower price detectors that are out there, they got all their, whatever they got going on is all on one side of one little teeny circuit board. That's where they can keep the bill of materials under control. Our
right.
stuff is serious microwave circuits on both sides for like the size of a playing card on both sides. So
right.
we got an expensive board, and well, that's just what it takes to get this job done.
Yeah, we saw the FCC teardown photos. We were able to see the internals, and
I
we
was
were like,
surprised those came up there. I was going to yell at my PCB about that because you can't hold them off for a while.
Right. Yeah.
But it's like, all right, whatever. I mean, and as soon as I saw there were, how should I put it, respectful comments on the forums.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, it wasn't a bad idea then. So you get sort of like a pre-torn down look at it.
Sure. Yeah, but we always, of course, have to put it through its paces to see how it performs in practice. But it's nice to kind of see a little bit behind the scenes.
I've seen a couple, there was a lot of speculation. What's that? Oh, look at that. And they say, well, go look at the patent. Oh, okay, look at that. Mm-hmm. And you've got some sharp guys out there on the forums.
There's some smart people on there, yeah.
They kind of nailed it. Not 100%, but the stuff that wasn't 100%, how are they supposed to know anyway? So
sure.
I thought that that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yes. Good to hear when people are able to look at stuff and kind of do a pretty good analysis. Like, I mean, I look at it and I can't fully understand what's going on by any means, so it's nice to just learn as I go along, and see what people like yourself or others have to say.
Well, I mean, you have a little bit of sensitivity towards radios because, as I understand it, you have a ham radio license.
I do, yeah. My background is like radar and laser stuff in school, but I never really applied it to build any radar detector, so I can kind of look at it and get a sense of what's going on, but I obviously wouldn't be able to do what you're doing to create this. Yeah.
And, you will have noticed that I only talk about things that you can either see in public or described in patents, and the rest of it is a little bit vague.
Sure. Of course, it makes sense for obvious reasons. Yeah. Well, speaking of patents, I know one of the patents that didn't come to fruition was a potential new LCD display. Can you tell me a little bit of the backstory with that patent?
Okay, so that's essentially what goes on the phone, right? I mean, if you look at all the elements of the patent, if that kind of protects the phone in certain ways. And we at the beginning of this project were all ready to go on like some sort of high automotive temp LCD or OLEDs or something.
Right.
And it's like, issue. And if we're trying to reduce the frontal thickness, so it's sleeker, can fit into tighter spaces around the rearview mirror, all that kind of stuff that, we've already been through the phase where we had the sort of like double cheeseburger stack in our early days of laser detection, and then we went back to the thin case.
Right, yeah.
And we got so much feedback about, I'm so glad you thinned out the case. We thought, okay, well, when we go to Gen 2, we'll try and thin it out some more because we know people like it.
Mm-hmm.
And the border around OLED displays takes up so much room that you almost have to have a flange sticking out to support it. So when we were trying to thin it down, there wasn't any room. And the other thing was that even with exotic circular polarized, sunlight washout filters and stuff, you had to run them really hot to even pretend to see them in the daylight. I mean, with on direct sunshine, I should say.
Right. Yeah.
If you're in the car with a black headliner, well, it's not that big a deal.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in a convertible, or you somehow decided to put it on the dash, and your sun coming in the window, whatever, then they get washed out. And then if you run them hot enough to see them, they kind of burn out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something we didn't want to have happen ever. And the high temp LCD stuff, just with the backlights and stuff on that also had a rim around it. So we said, well, we'll just go back to good old LEDs because we know they work, and we have a real high tech holographic diffuser.
I noticed that it's
layered up in the front. I mean, please don't take it to park to look at it.
No, I mean just looking at it.
It probably won't be sick again if you take it off. But it's this diffuser thing is really cool.
Uh-huh.
And the other thing we did was this goes back to an old Hewlett Packard LED, whether it's their dot matrix displays or their 7-segment stuff. This is from 30 years ago. There's a white paper out from back when HP, wasn't Agilent, wasn't, all these other things that it is now, on color discrimination as a way to help contrast. You get color contrast and you get, just black level contrast. And in the original V1, we just had black level contrast, and it was, you could get washed out more often than I would have liked in a convertible. So in this thing, it's got a purple filter in it, so when you shine a bright light on it, the off segments that want to pretend they're on are purple instead of red.
Right.
Or in the case of the Bluetooth indicator, it's blue instead of purple,
Mm-hmm.
So because I thought it was, serendipitous that the blue for the Bluetooth would come through pretty well unattenuated from purple.
Mm-hmm.
It gets toned down a little bit, but you don't want a really bright Bluetooth indicator.
Right.
And then the red comes blasting on through with like no attenuation. Yet the color contrast is there. So that's what that's all about. That's a finally getting around to doing something that Hewlett Packard told us about 30 or 40 years ago.
Gotcha. I was curious about that.
But it's scientific,
Yeah.
It's scientific.
Yeah. So I guess maybe my next question then would be about the laser side. So like laser sensitivity and some improved filtering on the laser side. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
It's just all new stuff. So it's a happy thing if it's better. The other one was pretty good.
The sensitivity was great, but the falsing I noticed on mine was pretty bad. I've noticed the filtering seems to...
That's another thing we have to get to
Yeah.
on our software science fair projects is how to get rid of like neon chimsels and Volvos and other things.
Yeah.
I guess infinities are sometimes the worst.
I passed a couple infinities recently.
Because now we got Volvo crash mitigation stuff out the front. They decided to use laser instead of 77 gig radar. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple others out there. So we will get to that as an evolution in our software refinement program.
Mm-hmm. I've been noticing...
Because we have to. Because I don't like it, so if I don't like it, I want it to go away.
Sure.
On the other hand, I don't want to diminish laser sensitivity. So again, it's a little bit of a science fair project. Because again, it's all about the statistics. And if you pulses in a row to actually detect.
Mm-hmm.
Real world doesn't give you that very often. So there's some interesting projects ahead to
That's an interesting point.
keep laser sensitivity up and get rid of the annoying things that you know are not cops.
So I guess if
So
you're...
that's not been implemented yet at all. So
Oh,
that's something
okay.
to come. But again, it'll be available in a software upgrade. And what's going to happen is when we get something that we want to change, we'll just put it in production. It'll start shipping, and then we'll put out an update app for it, and then get it out to everybody else, so you can put it in through your Android or Apple phone.
Great, yeah. The laser filtering, though, I'm noticing with the Gen 2, it does seem better. Like, I'm not getting the same falses against your Mazdas, Infinitis, and Volvos, but no, you're saying? Or
I don't
maybe
know.
I just got lucky?
Because it's all different. Sure, why not?
Uh-huh.
We know what we get for sensitivity tests here, because we have calibrated laser light level things where we actually take a laser gun and put a graduated optical attenuator in front of it and do adjustments, and then A/B test things and that kind of stuff. So we can tell what's going on. But as far as out on the road, since we didn't pay any attention to the refinement side of it yet, that's whatever it is, and I haven't used enough of it to but I do seem to think I don't get as many as I used to.
Yeah, I'm getting maybe 1 to 2 an hour on average, which is better than before, but still more than with most detectors. So I'm seeing some improvements, but it's not false-free yet.
No, and that, So another thing I want to talk about with, if we can rotate back to lane change radars.
Sure, yeah.
Is it's really interesting when you get to have 3 or 4 different flavors all at close proximity, because it puts out, there's lots of trash, and sometimes it kind of confuses the situation enough where something will break through.
Okay.
And the other thing is that I want to caution people that there's plenty of trash out there that compete with police radar signals.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these blind spot, lane change radars have just junked up the entire K-band, and they junk it up bad. And when you're trying to filter through that stuff, and you combine it with either a real police radar or some other lane change radar modulation types, it's lots of fun. Ha ha ha.
So it sounds like it's a lot harder to detect police radar when you're simultaneously detecting a blind spot false?
But trying to see through the lane change crap. So, because it picks a noise floor up. So if you're in a conga line of lane change radars, you're just plain not going to get full tilt, what you're used to in an isolated setting type range.
Sure, yeah.
Because it's going to chop off the first several, if not a little more than that dB.
Okay.
So that's just something to keep in mind. And it's and maybe someday we'll find a way to sort better. And that's on the science fair project list.
And that's something that would be tough for me, like as a tester to test. I'm like, how would I drive behind a blind spot car, which may then also block the signal, or like how do I test that scientifically?
It's even hard for us to test. So all we can do is more road testing, more lab testing, try and see where they meet.
On a lab test, would it be realistic to say, like, I have a blind spot transmitter and a police radar gun and fire both at the same time and start trying to see all of that, or how do you do that?
Well, okay, so then there's dynamic range issues if you do them in the room right next to each other.
That is true.
Because overloading the system with that was one of the favorite ways in the old days to bash arrows, which was to overload the system. Like there was a tester very early on that was at war with us because I guess I refused all
Okay.
And he took a handheld radar gun and walked around the test car with 6 to 10 foot range, and said, "Well, the thing points in all directions and da 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 da. It must,
Of course
it
it
doesn't work
does.
very well." It's like, well, okay. In that situation, I believe you, but why? I mean, does a cop car circle your car, and most of the time when you're driving, or is it, maybe it's not that way in real life? So.
Yeah, that's not a real life situation. Like, and even
Yeah,
for me, if I'm trying to demo arrows, like,
I would caution
don't do that.
to try to use real life situations. Now, real life, there could be a Subaru or something with one of these nasty junk things, 20 feet in front of your car. That's one car length, right? So yeah. So that could happen, but it doesn't happen all the time. And most of the time, you're not within 20 feet of a Subaru. So, it's... and someday we may get better at that. But for the time being, it's just going to cause trouble. And,
in terms then,
however, it doesn't cause enough trouble not to like how it's turned out for this phase of the invention.
Mm-hmm.
It's I'm pretty happy with how it is, but you will notice as you drive along, same route every day, and there might be some store doors that light off a block sooner when you're by yourself compared to when there's a conga line of lane change sensors in front of you. You'll just notice that because there's nothing to be done about it in the short run.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking then of
they just put out junk. It's right on the same channel as the thing you're trying to receive.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the the arrow accuracy stuff in real life. Like, I've noticed there's things like maybe reflections off of, maybe if the signal's coming from behind you and it bounces off of a sign or a semi, it can bounce back to the front horn, or if you have the detector maybe mounted in a way lower on the windshield so it doesn't have clean line of sight due to headrests or something. Like, what would you say is the optimal?
A lot of that, but that's been that way for
always.
Since 1992. I don't think there's a lot of difference.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that does affect it, and anybody else that's now in the arrows business would have to admit, yes, that's exactly what happened.
Of course, yeah, that's just a normal thing.
So we've tried to do things to try to smooth it out so it doesn't jump around a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's possible that it's too smooth for some people's taste. I happen to like it, but maybe they don't. I don't know.
Yeah. How about then GPS? I know the Gen 2 doesn't have GPS, and it sounds like you're not a big fan of incorporating GPS.
No, I'm not a big fan.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Okay. So, well, first of all, I don't want to spend all day in court.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, that's a legitimate thing. You're saying, well, we thought about this before Valentine 1 was even introduced to the market.
Uh-huh.
And we took a long, hard look at it. And it's like, well, yeah, it could work. And in the early implementations, when the competitor came out with it worked. But here's the thing: people expect it to shut up on things they don't want to hear, and stay shut up.
Mm-hmm.
Don't come back and need retrain it to shut up. And if you get really, really, really close, they still want it to shut up. Like drive right up in front of the door 15 feet away and still have it shut up.
Right.
Because that's their impression of what this particular feature does. So you have to engineer it so to keep people from complaining, which means on a particular frequency, it's locked out. There's no burn through because obviously the store door at 15 feet would burn it through, so there isn't any burn through to save you. The second thing is these store doors are of the crappiest RF manufacturing technique known to man that will still pass FCC type certification. So they wander around in frequency with temperature to beat the band. And if they're connected to a store door, which is an aluminum frame, and it's on the outside of the aluminum frame, they're going to be at outside air temperature real fast. So if the thing drifts over half the band between summer and winter, well, that's bad. But it's actually going to drift between morning and evening. because the sun's on it in the morning or whatever. In the evening, the temperature goes down and the sun's not on it anymore and all that stuff. So it wanders around in frequency. So if you're trying to block that thing, it has to have a pretty wide frequency range to make sure that it's blocked out.
What kind of frequency drift do you see in terms of, is it like 10 megahertz or 20, or what kind of range are we talking?
20. Yeah.
20?
Yeah. At least.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, the algebra, and then if your older detector, I mean the new ones are better, but if the older detector drifted by itself, you got to add that into it as well. So you end up with 4, 5, 6 channels in the in all of Ka band, and you end up blocking them completely. Okay, that means that there's a cop on that channel. It's blocked completely when you get into their area. So you say, well, the area's not big. It's like, well, now wait a minute. If you make a really, really long-range detector, the area is huge because you don't want to hear it a mile away. Mm-hmm. So you got to block it from a mile away. And so that channel is blocked out because how do you know it's a mile away right now? I mean, there's so many crazy things that go on, so that the more sensitive you get, the less helpful blocking out signals can be, just because it expands the radius of the cone of silence, like the old Get Smart TV show had. Mm-hmm. You had to put this bucket on your head, and now you can't hear anything. So I've never been convinced that it was worth the effort. And if you're just trying to make it not chatty, our applying now that we have a ton of range, we can actually wait a little bit before we go off. We can wait a little bit to see if the store door has a buddy. And if it's got a buddy, we'll wait a little longer yet before we announce it. By doing that on K-band, just like we used to do on X, it's not very chatty. So how much chatty can you stand, and at what price? So there are probably a lot of wild and crazy things you could do with enough data and enough this and enough that, and it's just, I thought, for the average person who just doesn't want to be annoyed, but wants long-range warning, I think what we got is plenty good. That's just my view.
That's reasonable. Yeah, and that perspective totally makes sense. Kind of whenever I hear the argument, sort of my counter to it is I think of some of the third-party apps that do this sort of GPS lockout stuff. One of the things, like in radar detectors, usually it's blocking out, 20 megahertz wide. It doesn't matter how many signals. It could be 1, 10, whatever. As long as it falls into that channel, it's going to block them all out. But I've noticed with the apps, it'll actually try to track how many signals are within each frequency range. So if it's, one door opener, but then a second signal shows up because it's a cop or whatever, it'll alert you to the second signal, even if it's within that channel. And that seems to help kind of mitigate the risk of potentially blocking out everything in that signal or in that frequency range.
Well, okay. So, yeah, that's again, more power to them. Mm-hmm. And someday maybe the court appearances will be over, and there'll be something else to talk about.
Sure.
We'll just see.
Sure, and I
the other thing
totally
is
get that.
It limits places you can put it, unless you want to have a remote GPS sensor. You can't, putting it up on the sun visor is kind of bad. You can't do it. So there are fitment issues. And, well, GPS is good for speed-sensitive muting, which is another way to keep chattiness from driving you nuts.
Sure.
And we already do that with Savvy.
You've
but
got
now we have a feature called eSavvy, and the new release is already released on iOS and coming soon on Android.
So kind of a low-speed muting that uses your phone's GPS. Yeah.
So anyway, and it raises the cost of the bill of materials, and it causes installation problems. So, would somebody want to pay another $50 to have GPS, and then not be? Well, not everybody. In fact, maybe maybe not very many, depending.
That's,
all depends on their irritation threshold from being chatty. So if we fix the general chatty issue to a large extent, then I think it's less mandatory in people's minds.
that's an interesting point, because like as we've been talking about it, one of the biggest criticisms I've been hearing on YouTube is like, no GPS? What? All modern detectors have GPS. And without getting into all the legal stuff, I mean, one of the big things, of course, is, well, locking out false alerts and dealing with false alerts. But if you're still able to deal with them with another approach, maybe your advanced logic mode and Savvy, have you found that to be a reasonable way to filter out a lot of these stationary false alerts without using GPS?
Well, I don't know about filter them out, but just make them less annoying. Now, maybe it's because I'm a radar detector dude.
Yeah.
But I kind of like knowing what's going on. I just don't want to be irritated by it.
Fair.
So, and the other thing is, like, what? No GPS? That's a common reaction of just knowing what bullet lists look like as opposed to a deep understanding of what the benefits are.
Mm-hmm.
And, people shop by features, and you check off boxes, and I'm hoping our users will be more discerning than that.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about what makes you happy. It's not what checks the boxes. It's all about what makes you happy when you use it. And I guess that's about that.
Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. And yeah, I mean, even without the GPS, you can pair it with your phone and get a lot of that functionality, and kind of, as we were talking earlier about not having some of those issues with the GPS lockouts. Like a lot of times the phone apps work even better and give you the GPS functionality without having it built into the detector. You do have to run an app and pair it with the phone, but you still can get the functionality.
Yeah. No, that's one of the reasons we did the API was to allow people to just do whatever.
And that was a brilliant move, by the way. Thank you for adding that in.
Well, I mean, I just thought that was the best way to help other people help us help them.
I'm surprised more companies haven't done that. It just seems like a no-brainer to make it an option.
Well, it's all about what they want to spend money doing, and everybody's got their own way of going down the road,
Sure. I guess that's kind of everything as far as on my list of things that I wanted to maybe talk to you about or ask. Is there anything that you'd like to maybe point out or share or talk about with the new V1 or your company? Or
well, I'm looking at kind of a list of topics on my computer screen right now. I think we've gone over all of them.
Yeah. I'm looking at a list here that I've been kind of updating as we talk even. So cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and tell me about the V1 and kind of talk shop with all this.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure, and thanks for all you do to try to inform the general public about what's going on.
Yeah, my pleasure. And if you ever see anything I say that's incorrect or whatever, by all means, let me know. I'll be happy to update it. I just want good quality, accurate information for people, and happy to share this. So, and thanks for coming on and just hearing it directly from the horse's mouth, Directly
all right.
from you.
Well, have a great day, and talk to you next time.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.